Category 5, a delineation reserved for only the strongest observed tropical cyclones. With wind speeds of at least 157 miles per hour, Category 5 hurricanes are guaranteed to create absolute destruction. Only 6% of hurricanes have become Category 5 since 1924, an even rarer occurrence is when those hurricanes actually make landfall. In the continental United States, many have come close, but only 4 hurricanes accomplished such a feat. The Labor Day hurricane in 1935, Hurricane Camille in 1969, Hurricane Andrew in 1992, and the topic of today's video, Hurricane Michael in 2018. In early October 2018, a disorganized area of storms in the northwestern Caribbean Sea rapidly evolved into one of the strongest hurricanes to ever hit the United States. In the span of roughly 2.5 days, the system evolved from a tropical storm to a Category 5 terror, with one of the lowest landfalling pressures observed in the United States. Until Michael, the Florida Panhandle's recorded history had not yet seen a landfalling storm higher than a Category 3. This year marks 5 years since Michael made landfall and left its mark on history in the states of Florida and Georgia. Today, I will be discussing the 2018 Atlantic hurricane season, as well as the origins, forecast, preparations, timeline of events, aftermath, historical significance, and retrospective on the community's response 5 years later. Welcome to Nature's Fury. In the last video, I covered Hurricane Florence, which was the first major storm of the 2018 Atlantic hurricane season. Not a whole lot happened between Florence and Michael. Gordon produced some flash flooding in the southeastern United States, Helene became a powerful Category 2 with its remnants shifting into Europe, and Kirk existed. Hurricane Leslie became one of the most erratic tracking storms in recent memory. Temperatures in the southeast and the Gulf of Mexico climbed 3 to 6 degrees Fahrenheit above the September average. The warmer temperatures, in turn, brought sea surface temperatures in the Gulf of Mexico to 2 to 4 degrees Fahrenheit higher than average. With this factor in play, any storm navigating the Gulf, shear withstanding, could easily intensify until landfall. That is precisely what happened with Michael. However, its birth was more complicated than most storms. But real quick, most people who like these videos are not subscribed to the channel. If you enjoy my content, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel and tells me I'm doing something right. Anyways, back to Hurricane Michael. Michael's origins, much like the cleaning pattern of a Roomba, were complex and confusing. So much so that even my brain was left wandering the floors looking for crumbs. As hard as it was for me to grasp this mess, I'll try to lay it out for you as painlessly as possible. On October 1st, 2018, a large area of disturbed weather formed over the central and western Caribbean Sea. This complicated weather pattern would, over the course of the day, absorb the remnants of Tropical Storm Kirk. Then on the 2nd, a convective burst occurred, possibly being associated with a tropical wave moving into the region. This burst led to the formation of a small-scale surface low southwest of Jamaica, with southwest motion into northeastern Honduras. By the 5th, this low became embedded within a large cyclonic gyre over Central America, with a southwestern vorticity center over the extreme eastern Pacific Ocean. What is a cyclonic gyre? Put simply, a cyclonic gyre is simply a broad area of slowly spinning air rotating counterclockwise in the northern hemisphere. On the 6th, the Pacific vorticity was absorbed into a larger gyre as it moved inland, whose center reformed over the northwestern Caribbean Sea. The low-pressure precursor to Michael became more defined over the Caribbean, and the system was labeled as Potential Tropical Cyclone 14 at 4 p.m. Central Daylight Time on the 6th. The system was located in an environment of moderate westerly vertical wind shear. Despite this, the circulation and convection associated with the low gradually became better organized, and the system formed into a tropical depression at 4 a.m. Central Daylight Time on the 7th. The center reformed to the east in response to convective bursts during the first 6 to 12 hours after genesis. Despite moderate to strong southwesterly wind shear caused by an upper-level trough over the central Gulf, rapid intensification occurred, with the cyclone becoming a tropical storm at 1 p.m. Central Daylight Time on the 7th, and a hurricane at 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time on the 8th. Michael began to turn north-northeastward around the west side of a mid-level ridge over the western Atlantic. The storm's rapid intensification leveled off due to the decay of the eye wall's convective structure. The storm then moved west of Cuba, minorly impacting the country before transitioning into the Gulf of Mexico. Even in its early tropical storm stages, Michael was sounding alarms in the Florida Panhandle, with the forecast looking more and more grim by the hour. From the moment of its naming, Michael's models projected a beeline for the northern Gulf Coast, with the Panhandle directly in the storm's crosshairs. With the storm's transition into the Gulf, all fears were realized as model outputs continued to showcase a worst-case scenario unfolding. The National Hurricane Center predicted storm surge values ranging from 9 to 13 feet in areas from near the Forgotten Coast through the Big Bend region, and 6 to 9 feet of surge from areas around Destin to the Forgotten Coast. Due to its fast-moving nature, inland flooding was not a primary concern. Michael was expected to bring rainfall totals ranging from 5 to 10 inches in portions of Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia. Bear in mind those last three states were already reeling from Hurricane Florence, and did not need more rain under any circumstances. However, the biggest concern was the short lead time that those on the coast had. The storm was expected to make landfall midday that Wednesday, with the storm being named on Sunday. Those along the Gulf Coast into southwest Georgia and southeast Alabama only had 3 days to prepare. The Panhandle's history with tropical cyclones only made things worse. As previously stated, recorded history showed that the Panhandle had yet experienced a storm stronger than a Category 3. For the Panhandle, Michael was the most formidable threat birthed from a tropical cyclone since Hurricane Dennis in 2005. At 4 a.m. Central Daylight Time on October 8th, the National Hurricane Center issued a hurricane watch from the Alabama-Florida border to the Suwannee River, and a tropical storm watch for the Alabama coastline, and from the Suwannee River down to Tampa Bay. At 4 p.m., the storm transitioned into the Gulf, and the hurricane watch was upgraded to a hurricane warning. A storm surge warning was issued from the Okaloosa-Walton County line southeastward to the Ain-Clote River. Storm surge watches were issued from the Alabama-Florida border to the Okaloosa-Walton County line, and from the Ain-Clote River to the Tampa Bay area. As the storm progressed towards land, additional alerts were issued for the North and South Carolina coastlines, as the storm was expected to maintain tropical storm status far inland. On top of the threat for tropical weather was the threat for severe weather. On October 9th, the Storm Prediction Center in Norman, Oklahoma issued a Day 2 slight risk for Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina. The next day, a Day 1 enhanced risk was issued for the same area, with a 10% TOR parameter in place. On the 11th, a Day 1 enhanced risk was outlined for North Carolina and Virginia for the threat of tornadoes. Time was of the essence, and the states of Georgia, Alabama, and Florida had to prepare fast. On October 8th, Florida Governor Rick Scott declared a state of emergency for 35 counties, telling the press, "Michael is forecast to be the most destructive storm to hit the Florida Panhandle in decades." FEMA mobilized resources from the federal government to assist with preparation, and mandatory evacuation orders were issued. The same day, Georgia Governor Nathan Deal issued a state of emergency for 92 counties, and Alabama Governor Kay Ivey issued a state of emergency for the entire state. Back in Florida, 500 members of the National Guard were activated, with another 5,000 placed on standby. Tyndall Air Force Base ordered the evacuation of all non-mission essential military and civilian personnel, along with an aircraft transfer inland. Colleges in both Georgia and Florida were closed, and Atlanta Motor Speedway opened their campgrounds to evacuees. Offshore oil platforms in the Gulf of Mexico were evacuated. State highways were backed up with people trying to move away from the coastlines. Shelves were empty in multiple grocery stores, and long lines for gas formed at gas stations. An alarming number of residents along the coast persisted in staying. A survey of 1,523 people in Alabama, Georgia, and Florida found that 61% of survey respondents did not evacuate, and 80% of respondents underestimated the hurricane or its potential scope. Now, it was a waiting game, waiting for Michael to move into the coastline. As Michael entered the Gulf, its rapid intensification continued until it made landfall. On the 9th, Michael turned northwestward under the influence of a mid-level ridge. The northward motion continued through the 10th, as Michael moved between the ridge and a mid-latitude shortwave trough moving through the western Gulf Coast. The trough created a strong northerly outflow channel, which may have aided Michael's rapid intensification phase. Before reaching the coastline, Michael turned northeastward as it encountered the southern edge of the mid-latitude westerlies. The situation kept looking more and more dire. Eric Blake, a scientist at the National Hurricane Center, said the following in a tweet: "Had to take antacids. I'm so sick to my stomach today because of this impending catastrophe." On approach to landfall, the Storm Prediction Center issued a tornado watch for Florida and Georgia, with a 60% probability of 2 or more tornadoes and a 20% probability of 1 or more strong tornadoes. Additional tornado watches would be issued as the storm moved inland. At 11:11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, NWS Tallahassee issued its first ever extreme wind warning, encompassing the entirety of Gulf County, Southern Bay County, and southwestern Franklin County. 3 more extreme wind warnings were issued, including Seminole County in Georgia and Houston County in Alabama. Around 12:30 p.m. on October 10th, Hurricane Michael made landfall near Tyndall Air Force Base as a Category 5 hurricane with winds of 160 miles per hour and a pressure of 918 millibars. In the Panhandle, all hell broke loose. Transformers exploded and houses were utterly destroyed. Nobody could have imagined the magnitude of the storm until it was on their doorsteps. 9 to 14 feet of storm surge battered the Forgotten Coast, with a 14-foot storm surge recorded at Mexico Beach. Panama City and areas between Indian Pass and Steinhatchee observed 6 to 9 feet of storm surge. 160 mile-per-hour winds lashed the coastline, causing catastrophic damage. Major hurricane force wind gusts continued inland into portions of Seminole County, Georgia. Rainfall totals ranged from 3 to 6 inches across the southeast, with isolated amounts ranging from 10 to 13 inches in the Florida Panhandle and the Appalachian Mountains on the storm's way out to sea. The maximum rainfall reported was 13.01 inches near Black Mountain, North Carolina, while Lynn Haven, Florida reported a rainfall total of 11.62 inches. River flooding was reported, but was limited to areas in the Panhandle, North Carolina, and the Mid-Atlantic. Michael was the first Category 5 hurricane to make landfall in the United States since Andrew, and the most intense hurricane to make landfall since Camille in 1969. Landfall caused Michael to rapidly weaken. The storm moved into southwest Georgia around 4 p.m. as a high-end Category 2, becoming one of the strongest recent hurricanes to directly impact the state of Georgia. Operationally, it was stated to have struck Georgia as a Category 3, which would have been the first time that happened since the 1800s. It was downgraded during post-analysis. The high winds associated with Michael contributed to most of the damage in the state, with considerable damage to crops and unsturdy structures. The storm then accelerated to the northeast in response to the cold front moving in behind it. Michael's center eventually moved west of Albany, and then weakened to a tropical storm before moving southeast of Macon. It then passed just west of Augusta before crossing into South Carolina near 7 a.m. Wind speeds in the central core had decreased to below tropical storm force, but over coastal waters, the intensity could still be felt. 4 hours later, Michael entered North Carolina. The storm then underwent extratropical transition, with the central pressure falling and the winds intensifying northwest of an increasingly elongated center. Michael became extratropical at 8 p.m. on the 11th, and began moving northeast, racing off into the Atlantic Ocean 6 hours later. Its track over the Carolinas brought with it 4 to 8 inches of rain, flash flooding, and 40 to 60 mile-per-hour wind gusts that brought down trees and power lines, leaving hundreds of thousands without power. Tornadoes during Michael's lifespan were present, but not notable. 16 tornadoes touched down from Florida to Virginia. All were rated EF0 or EF1. Over the Atlantic, the winds re-intensified to hurricane force as Michael rode the subtropical ridge, weakening as it turned southeast, then south on the 14th. Its remnant low dissipated after absorbing Hurricane Leslie's remnants in a Fujiwara interaction. As Michael accelerated into the Atlantic, everyone shifted focus to the aftermath. And the aftermath was all but unimaginable for those in Florida and Georgia. The trail of destruction Michael left behind was outstanding. Across both Florida and Georgia, the damage from Michael was indescribable. Panama City, the most populated coastal city relative to Michael's landfall location, was spared from the worst of the storm due to being on the western side. Yet the damage, well, spoke for itself. Panama City and the Florida Panhandle as a whole have had numerous close calls, but they were not lucky with Michael. Roofs were ripped from homes, trees were torn out from their roots, cars were crushed by debris, power lines were downed across the city, and floodwaters plagued downtown. 69% of residential homes and 90% of all structures just in Panama City were damaged. Heartbreaking, just heartbreaking, said Kay Hankins, fighting back tears. There are devastating events that you see on TV all over. Katrina, other disasters. But until you're really there and realize your city is gone, it's just heartbreaking. The damage was severe enough for Powwow Broadcasting to cease all operations in Panama City. Curfews were put in place in Panama City and across other municipalities throughout the week. Bay Medical Sacred Hospital in Panama City had their windows blown out, a cracked wall, and roof damage. Coastal highways between Panama City and Alligator Point were washed out. In Mariana, Florida, businesses lost their roofs, and the exterior walls of some buildings collapsed. 400 buildings in the town were destroyed, and 600 more reported major damage. Timber damage costs in Florida were over $1.2 billion, with almost 3 million acres of forest land being damaged. Michael was responsible for $18.4 billion in damages in the state of Florida. Damage in southeast Alabama was minimal, with the exception of the Wiregrass region. In Houston County, where the town of Dothan lies, damage was widespread. Across the county, trees were knocked over, damaging houses, closing roads, and knocking down power lines. Southwest Georgia was hit hard. Roofs were damaged, a silo was flipped over, highway signs were blown down, and roofs were peeled off buildings as far inland as Albany. Pecan farms across southern Georgia were wiped out. The entire crop was lost in Seminole County, and 85% of it was lost in Decatur. What was expected to be a record harvest for cotton, a large portion of the crop was wiped out. $480 million worth of vegetables were destroyed, and 2 million chickens died due to the storm. In Georgia, Michael caused roughly $3 billion in damages, becoming the costliest natural disaster in Georgia state history. The record was originally held by a separate tropical cyclone that those in the state couldn't forget, Tropical Storm Alberto in 1994. A storm that caused roughly $1 billion in damages and held onto its title for 24 years. Damages in the Carolinas and Virginia were minimal, with most of the damages coming from fallen trees and blocked roads. Roads across the mid-Atlantic were closed due to fallen trees and minor flooding. Across the southeast, Michael caused 1.7 million customers to lose power, with the outages being the highest in Virginia, North Carolina, Florida, and Georgia. The damage was nothing like the Florida coastline had seen in years. Nothing could really come close except for storms such as Andrew, Ivan, and more recently Irma just the year prior. But there was one area that was hit the hardest. An area that received the brunt of Michael's raw power. An area known as the Forgotten Coast, spanning from near Tyndall Air Force Base to St. Mark's on Appalachia Bay. The Forgotten Coast spans for nearly 200 miles of coastline, including 5 islands and nearly 100 historic sites. Many called it home. Small communities lacking big-name shops and high-rise buildings that areas such as Panama City had. A place where everyone knew everybody, and they would not give it up for anything. It was paradise to them. Keyword being was. What happened on October 10th, 2018, changed the Forgotten Coast for the rest of time. Those who rode out the storm, or those who returned after its passage, came to find what once was. The Forgotten Coast was now in fear of truly being forgotten, as what was left of their homes was nothing but complete and total devastation.
Covering storms. I have never seen wind damage like this from a hurricane. It is literally like an EF2 or EF3 tornado 20 or 30 miles wide.
From west to east along the Forgotten Coast, complete annihilation. Houses that once stood were just gone, and what was left, if there was anything left, it was left mangled beyond recognition. The complete and utter devastation began just a little bit west of the Forgotten Coast at Tyndall Air Force Base. At the base, Colonel Brian Laidlaw, the commander, said a year after that the ride-out team was prepared for a Category 2 hurricane. According to Laidlaw, they realized very quickly that this storm would be the storm that they had trained for. Those at the base only knew they were in the eye of the storm because the walls stopped shaking. When those at the base came out after the storm, they saw the true scope of what happened. The radio antenna on top of Building 909 was damaged, causing the roof's membrane to detach. The base leaders said that many of the buildings were a complete loss. Hangars that survived past storms were left with holes everywhere. At least 3 twin-engine propeller planes owned by a contractor and used for training were buried in the wreckage of the largest hangar, along with what appeared to be an F-22 and at least a few QF-16 jets. The marina, its structures, and docks were also destroyed. A formal assessment performed at the base revealed that of the 482 buildings, half of them were destroyed or damaged beyond repair, with the other half being damaged but still structurally sound enough to be repaired. The flight line and drone runaway was severely damaged. The base left uninhabitable because the base's power, water, and sewage systems were down. The destruction at Tyndall Air Force Base eerily resembled the destruction that was observed at Homestead Air Force Base after Hurricane Andrew in 1992. The Tyndall Air Force Base was one of the hallmark bases for the United States Air Force. The base trains F-22 Raptor pilots and maintenance personnel to support combat air forces. One of the most important bases for national security was now one of the hardest hit areas from a Category 5 hurricane. Right next to the base was Mexico Beach, a city with a population of a little over 1,200 at the time. The city was ground zero. The town was destroyed. Blocks of homes near the beach were obliterated, pushed off their foundations due to the 14-foot storm surge. The surge also responsible for the multiple destroyed second-story buildings in town. Rows upon rows of homes were turned into piles of splintered lumber or were crumpled and slumped at odd angles. Entire roofs were torn away and dropped onto a road. Stairs laid on the ground leading to houses that no longer existed. Fires burned with nobody to put them out. One building burning to the ground. The public pier, a landmark for the city, washed away. Messes of wood timbers, sodded pink insulation, electrical wires, and household items were the only evidence of seaside homes and businesses. The El Governor Motel suffered major damage up to the second story, and the El Governor RV Park was destroyed. Along US 98, neighborhoods looked like a child's playroom after a massive tantrum. One side of the homes exposed to the elements, and soggy piles of furniture were pushed against the back walls. Of the 1,692 buildings in the city, 1,584 buildings, 93.6% of all buildings in the city were damaged. 809, 47.8% of buildings in the city were destroyed. Local residents who rode out the storm or came back after Michael moved through were left dazed at what they were seeing. There's not a word in the dictionary to explain how bad it was. It's like the end of the world. It's amazing anybody's still alive, still standing. In the blink of an eye, it's all gone. It's horrible, Thomas Jett, a resident of Mexico Beach, told the Washington Post. When rescue workers did house-to-house searches, they were peppered with questions. When would FEMA arrive? When would the power be back? Another resident, Janet Kinch, returned to see the foundation of her home remained, but almost nothing else. This wasn't the first time that she had her house destroyed by a hurricane. It happened in 1995 during Opal. She told the Washington Post, "My husband just died 2 weeks ago. Oh, I can't believe this. The house is gone for the second time." A woman and her friend were sifting through the remains of her home, loading what she could salvage into the boot of a car. "I'll never step back in there," she said through the tears. Even months later after the storm, the city still resembled a war zone. Bob Wilson, aged 89, 7 months after the storm, rode out Michael in his aging Mexico Beach manufactured home. 7 months after the storm, he was unable to get his house repaired. Other residents said the town will never be the same, not after Michael. In nearby Port St. Joe, the town was in a similar state. Neighborhoods were almost unrecognizable. Downtown was littered with debris from inside the water-damaged businesses. Large boats were stuck in the grass. Those remaining at the docks were pushed upright, and smaller boats were located 300 yards away in the Piggly Wiggly parking lot. The luscious sand dunes, gone. Locals were heartbroken at what had happened. Sheriff Mike Harrison held back tears while thumbing through a catalog, which had a picture of a child running through the snow-white sand on the beach. His county doesn't look like that anymore. I went to our favorite restaurant the other day and looked at it just ripped to shreds. The scary thing is, they're not sure if they're going to rebuild. Many know at least about Mexico Beach, Tyndall Air Force Base, and Panama City, but there were numerous other areas that were seemingly forgotten. Cape San Blas, part of the St. Joseph Peninsula, was left with little. 2 houses burned down in town due to there being no water for the fire company to put them out. Houses along the coastline were destroyed. The St. Joseph State Park was no longer accessible by vehicle, as the storm surge cut through the peninsula, creating 2 inlets. Sand dunes, obliterated. Apalachicola was temporarily cut off from the rest of the state, with US Highway 98 to the west blocked by pine trees and debris, with the causeway to the east being covered by floodwaters. Downtown was covered with debris that was pushed in by the storm surge. In East Point, Florida, the town looked like a ghost town. John Cooper, a local, found his boat washed up among other debris at Sportsman Lodge. The lodge devastated. The White Eagle Lodge destroyed. A boat lied on the ground right next to the U.S. Post Office. Business after business utterly obliterated. Roads deformed and eroded away. Extreme beach erosion exposed tree roots. Highways were covered with trees. The town was destroyed. More destruction in Carabel. A local, Robert Mulligren, returned home to find debris pushing against the inside of the front door. 5 days later, after the storm moved through, water was still pooled in the light fixture hanging from the ceiling. Diesel fuel left a film on the water around boats in the marina, and those boats sat stacked on top of each other under the Carabel Bridge below the water, tethered to the muddy bottom of the Carabel River. Houses at ground level in Lanark Village were gone. Those on pilings were mostly spared. Roofs rested atop loose cinder blocks, seagrass blanketed the interior of homes. Nearly every home in Lanark that sat on the ground was rendered uninhabitable. Parts of Alligator Point were left unrecognizable. Beach erosion was so severe that property appraisers told the press that some homeowners may not be able to rebuild. Windows facing the sea were shattered, blown out walls facing the ocean breezes. Steps dangle from houses. Some homes sat on the ground, their pilings knocked out from below. Residents unable to comprehend the utter disaster that was around them. In St. Mark's, water rose 4 feet in Boland's Grocery, the oldest retail business in town. The owner told the press that it was the most destructive storm the town had seen. The Sweet Magnolia Inn was heavily damaged. Washers, dryers, even a baby grand piano was left upside down. That doesn't cover every place that was hit hard along the Forgotten Coast, but I believe I've painted the picture. To say Michael was like nothing the area had seen before is an understatement. Many who had spent so much time working throughout their lives, raised families, became part of a community, spent most of their lives along the Forgotten Coast and were living the golden years of their lives during retirement, had everything swept away from them by one storm in the span of less than a day. The communities along the coastline and further inland, such as in southwest Georgia, were in desperate need of aid. Just like every other major disaster, it was during the aftermath of Michael when the best of humanity came out. Outside of Panama City, volunteer veterans worked to clear debris from more than 12 miles of road, using chainsaws to cut through fallen trees and hauling away massive debris. The veterans waterlogged mattresses and washing machine parts to create a path to homes that were cut off from the state. The veterans, such as Brenna McAllister, said, "We just got a convoy of veterans trained in working in war zones and went to work. It gives us a sense of purpose." The Salvation Army teamed up with Operation Barbecue Relief, providing hot meals for those in Panama City and Tallahassee. Corporate sponsors were also instrumental in helping Operation Barbecue Relief. Seaboard Foods owned Butterball and Prairie Fresh provided turkey and pork products. Old Hickory Pits donated commercial smokers. Mercury One, a separate charitable foundation started in 2011, was providing financial assistance. And the Lowe's donated $10,000, and that was just for one day alone. Tyndall Air Force Base became a place of refuge for those who had been hit hard by the storm. A tent city was set up, and hot food was available to those who came by. The base saw an immense amount of support. Colonel Brian Laidlaw remarked on the 1-year anniversary. "The Air Force and our joint partners sent us relief faster than we were able to take it. We saw an outpouring of support from the Air Force and other organizations to get us back on our feet. Laidlaw was focusing on helping the families of his crew and the families that laid on the Florida coastline. I'm not looking past the next 24 to 48 hours. For me right now, it's what I can do to take care of these people, their families. How do I help them put their lives back together? My people right now, they want to know where they're going to live. They want to know where their kids are going to school. They want to know what base they're going to move to. He drove around giving fist bumps to his people, doing everything in his power to boost the morale of his people. He told everyone, "You need anything, you let me know." On October 25th, Vice President Mike Pence said in a speech at the base that Tyndall would rebuild. Gulf County Sheriff Mike Harrison told NWF Daily News that the community shined. Outside agencies came in to help, and neighbors were helping neighbors. Friends were helping friends. Evidence of such was found in Mexico Beach. Marcy Elderman pulled out her gas grill and declared that she was going to cook for everyone in her neighborhood. Her neighbors spent the previous evening sleeping in cars outside their ruined homes. Police Chief Anthony Kelly said he's spoken to those in the town, where residents remember neighbors' birthdays and anniversaries. He said that they would rebuild. From the outside looking in, the town's ability to bounce back was uncertain, but the residents said that it will happen, eventually. One word to describe Mexico Beach: resilient. Kelly told the Tallahassee Democrat that the residents are all wanting to make sure that each neighbor on each side and the neighbor after that is fine. More than the devastation that's going on in their lives, they continue wanting to check on someone else. That is Mexico Beach. You can't buy that. The United States Army used heavy equipment to clear away fallen trees so rescuers could reach trapped residents. Schools in Gulf County opened up on October 23rd, bringing back some form of normalcy to residents, whatever was left of it. Across other residencies along the Forgotten Coast, people were helping each other out, putting their neighbors before themselves. One sentiment was present across all of those along the coast: they will rebuild. Donation drives across the country began being held for those in Florida and Georgia. In southwest Georgia, faith-based groups such as Alferia First United Methodist Church helped communities for at least a year, and Joe's Family Restaurant handed out about 2,500 meals a day during the week after the storm, regardless of a person's ability to pay for the food. President Donald Trump signed a federal disaster declaration for the Florida Panhandle and southwest Georgia, with the Trump administration and the state governments of Florida and Georgia pledging to rebuild the communities that laid in ruin. Both President Trump and Vice President Mike Pence traveled to both Florida and Georgia to tour the damage. However, as the months passed by, there was another sentiment that was becoming a major point of concern: the fear of being forgotten. One of the Forgotten Coast's biggest concerns was the thought of being forgotten by the general public. There was no doubt that the main city that would get the attention would be Panama City, but for locations such as Mexico Beach and Port St. Joe, the thought of being left behind was real. 7 months after the storm crashed into Florida, residents were seriously concerned that the town would be turned into a resort paradise for the rich, and that their small, local community would be lost in the process, remaining as Mexico Beach in name only. The mayor was frustrated with politicians on both sides of the aisle for delays in getting more money, and the lack of rebuilding. Residents complained about the cost of renting being taken advantage of by property owners and realtors profiting off of high demand. Even with all the aid that was donated to Hurricane Michael relief, it paled in comparison to the monetary donations made the year prior. In nearby Port St. Joe, Kim Nobles grew up in the town and wants the communities to rebuild, scared that her small town will come back looking like a resort area. Nobles told Florida Today, "I feel just like a lot of other people feel. You hate to say we've been forgotten, but we're a small area. It's not like being in Katrina with such a populated area. We have family members that come down for the first time, and they're like, I can't believe it looks like this. It's just part of being the Forgotten Coast. In nearby southwest Georgia, barely any news sources cover what happened in the state other than the bare minimum. The state's costliest disaster has little to no coverage outside of a few articles here and there. In the years since, it seems like the thought of communities such as Mexico Beach, Port St. Joe, East Point, St. Mark's, Donaldsville, among many others, seem like they do not exist anymore. They have stories to tell, of survival, of persistence, and their voices barely escape the state that they are from. While most may have forgotten the true severity of what happened in areas along the Forgotten Coast in southwest Georgia, they never did, and worked to rebuild to the best of their abilities. So the question arises, how are the hardest hit areas doing today? Nearly 5 years ago, in October 2018, Hurricane Michael made landfall near Tyndall Air Force Base at peak intensity, with winds of 160 miles per hour and a minimum central pressure of 918 millibars. The storm caused $25.5 billion in damages and killed 74, 59 in the United States and 15 in Central America before being named. Michael became the 8th costliest hurricane in U.S. history. At the time of recording, Michael is the 10th costliest. Michael completely devastated the Forgotten Coast and areas far inland, such as portions of southern Alabama and Georgia. 5 years have passed since, so what has happened to the hardest hit areas? Businesses have begun reopening across the coast, and cities are progressing further rebuilding their communities. In Panama City, John Lee Nissan reopened on September 14th, 2023. The city still has a long way to go, but is looking better than immediately after the storm. As of September 19th, county commissioners still have 4 renovation projects that are a major concern, and the commission is still working on how to handle the projects. The Tyndall Air Force Base is in a much better position than it was 5 years ago. Sand dunes, box culverts, oyster reefs, and new wind-resistant buildings rated to withstand winds up to 165 miles per hour are allowing Tyndall to rebuild for future storms. $5 billion is going into the base from the Air Force, and the base's reconstruction is expected to continue into 2027, marking the largest military construction project undertaken by the Pentagon. Mexico Beach lost about 300 full-time residents over the course of 5 years, and the scars are less visible, but unaware tourists still ask about the empty lots that lie along the beaches. The El Governor Motel reopened in June 2023 at 80% capacity, and hopes to be at full capacity soon. A project is in place to rebuild the city's public pier, but it has yet to break ground. Tourism in 2023 is at record highs in Bay County. Mexico Beach in particular had a record year in revenue, surpassing totals from before Michael. In April 2023, the marina returned to Port St. Joe, and the number of boats that could be stored was doubled from what it was before Michael. Near Cape San Blas, the St. Joseph Peninsula State Park reopened in January 2019. Specific sources on the other communities are limited, but a few trends are present. Tourism has rebounded, and the worst of the damage has been cleaned up. However, residents still reminisce and remind those who come through that their communities will never be the same. Issues have arisen since then. Affordable housing, an already existing issue, was exacerbated by Michael. Rent across Bay County has been jacked up in a tight market. Temporary housing has been slow to arrive, and corporations and the wealthy have taken up shop where they can to earn a profit from locations that used to belong to locals. Thankfully, communities have been able to push back when they can, but the attempts to turn local communities into luxury resorts persisted after the storm moved through. 2 years after the storm, Farmers in southeast Alabama were still struggling due to crop prices being below what they wanted them to be, and less than expected help from the federal government. Information out of these communities and how they are performing is also minimal, especially for southwest Georgia and areas east of Port St. Joe. Those areas have seemingly been forgotten by the press. 5 years later, the vast majority of the communities, although some have lost members, have shown strong resilience to what Mother Nature threw at them. Michael left many back at square one, but in 2023, many areas have rebuilt and continue to rebuild. To those in Florida, Georgia, and Alabama, Hurricane Michael is a storm that could never be forgotten. And it's a storm that I will not forget anytime soon. Wow, that turned out to be longer than I was expecting it to be. I guess the streak of making videos that are longer than the first playthrough of Spark the Electric Jester 2, not counting cutscenes, is over. Well, I guess that kind of brings up to a better question of what exactly I'm covering next. Okay, so originally I had the skit where Terrarina was in a chair, but I feel like this is more appropriate to have this written out and scripted. So basically the Ian video is being delayed until next year due to scheduling issues. Yay. Turns out with Calc 3, my free time is more limited than before. When you look at that, who could have guessed it? Besides, everyone besides me. Basically, going into October, I realized that I had no real time to throw a video on Hurricane Ian into the mix if I really wanted to go through with what I want to do with the video on Super Typhoon Haiyan. That being said, the Haiyan video, which I know is not what everybody really was wanting and was hyped to see, because everybody wants to see the Ian video, because it's the big storm from last year and not something from 10 years ago. The video on Haiyan, I have a lot of expectations for, and a lot of ideas of how I want to cover it. It's something that I seriously hope you all tune in for. I haven't gotten that far in researching it yet. I have a test in Calc 3 at the time that I'm recording this a week from now. But I already know it is going to be one of the most important videos and one of the most important subjects that I've ever covered. Yeah, that's it. Roll the credits. Special thanks to my proofreaders, those being Thomas Schwent, Ian Height, and Neptune, Celtic White for the character stills I use, Zinno, Cyanide Blue, and Cracklick for letting me use their music for whenever I use it, Xavier Burns for providing me with the cyclone animation of Michael, alongside his icons, and everyone for watching. It means a lot. I want to give a specific thanks to Squeaks for providing me with some damage photos, and if anyone has any footage for my next project, which is Super Typhoon Haiyan, which I doubt anyone actually has, but let's just say you do, and you do not mind me using your footage, you can send it to my burner email, which is listed on screen now. Special thanks to those subscribed to the channel Patreon or are a YouTube member. Those being a Scooper, Montpellier, Tanner Lepper, That Dude, and Von Guros at the Ulfi's Army tier, Helldrake Zero at the Ulf Junior tier, and Basilius of Stupidonia, Dante DMC, Epix, Hannah Stormer, Jay Cario, King Shisha, Liz Swaff, Neon Binary, Sandra Dunn West, Tennille's Weather Marine Space Station, Talkboy, and Van Granny at the Ulf Mini tier. If you want to have access to full uncut interviews, my scripts, and my notes alongside other things in the future, consider subscribing to the Patreon or becoming a member. It helps me financially and will allow me to do in-person interviews in the future, hopefully. Anyways, that covers everything. If you enjoy what I do, consider liking, subscribing to the channel, commenting your thoughts, and sharing it around, all that jazz. I'm Alferia, you all stay safe, and I'll see you all soon.